You're listening to the Sales Success Stories podcast, where we deconstruct world-class sales performers to provide insights and strategies to help you improve. To learn more, visit us at top1.fm. Here's your host, Scott Ingram.
Today on the Sales Success Stories podcast, my guest is Nate Branscome. Nate is the top account executive at Chili Piper out of Denver, Colorado. Welcome to the show, Nate.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Really glad to have you here. Now, I'm going to go out on a super scary limb here and say that this episode of the podcast is sponsored by the brand new Daily Sales Tips podcast. As I'm recording this, that show doesn't even exist yet. So nothing like a little public social pressure to ensure that I actually deliver on this. So to learn a bit more, we'll talk about it more in a little bit here. But if you visit dailysales.tips, you can get the details. All right, Nate, let's jump right into this. Talk about the top 3 things that you believe have contributed most to your success in sales.
Sure. So, I think the first thing is something called essentially the growth equation. So we have a required reading at Chili Piper. When you start, you get a list of, a couple books that they want you to read. And one's called Peak Performance by Brad Stulberg. But he pretty much outlines the growth equation and how you can essentially apply it to not only your professional life, but really anything in life. And what the equation is essentially stress plus rest equals growth. So very similarly to like if you're at the gym lifting weights, to achieve that muscle growth, you need to stress the muscle. But where you actually get the growth is when you rest and, relax it. So it's kind of going into, applying that to your professional life as well and pretty much everything, in that you need to push yourself, past your comfort zone, but also make sure you have that time to rest and recover and grow. Because if you keep going nonstop, you're eventually going to burn out and you're not going to be able to, do that consistently. So what I kind of took out of that is, not only taking, I think you need to take like vacations after periods of rough work, for example, like end of quarter, end of year. I know we're talking between, Christmas and New Year's. So this is probably a prime time for someone to take some time off. But also on the daily, if you have a busy morning, back-to-back meetings, maybe like 10 minutes of meditation kind of midday. So I try to use Headspace's app, which is kind of just an app on your phone to make it really easy to meditate, but essentially just taking a break midday to kind of reset and allow you to, essentially keep going, but at a more reasonable rate. So this is how I personally, prevent burnout kind of with the daily grind, but also in the long term. It allows you to really keep yourself happy and motivated. So you can take breaks, doing the things you love. So, hanging out with your family. I have dogs, a fiance. I like snowboarding. I like going on vacations and traveling. So it kind of also reminds me why I'm working so hard and keeps me motivated to continue doing so, while also giving me the time to, recover and grow.
Nice. So I don't want to interrupt the flow on the top 3 here too much, but I've got a couple of quick questions. So what else is on that reading list as you guys come on board there? Oh, and we'll link all those up at top1.fm.
Sure. So we have The Way of the Wolf as well, which is a great book that kind of goes more into the technique of actual sales. I'm sure a lot of the sales professionals listening to this are pretty familiar with it, where this Peak Performance book is a lot more geared to kind of your work-life balance and balancing your professional life. Those are the 2 that we basically have off the bat. So we get those before we even start. So we try to knock those out early. To be honest, we have a bunch of different readings that kind of rotate depending on what makes sense. Another big one is Never Split the Difference, which is one of my honestly favorite books. So I'd recommend that to anyone that hasn't read it. But essentially, it goes into, a hostage negotiator kind of explaining how they do negotiations and how that can apply to, business life as well. So the books do kind of rotate, but those are the top 3 that, we focus on when someone initially starts at Chili Piper.
Nice. And then I think the rest phase of the growth equation that you described makes sense, right? That's pretty self-explanatory. How do you think about the stress phase? Like what are you doing in that phase?
Yeah, I think it's just, it can really apply to, or I guess it can really be a bunch of different things. But for me, like, for example, when I started, I was, essentially working my ass off, and that I wanted to ramp as quickly as possible. So, you might be working 12-hour days, you might be working nights and weekends, which is totally fine, but I don't think it's completely sustainable. So with the rest piece of it, I think it's saying, hey, it's okay to really grind and push that out. And I think that's what a lot of sales professionals are talking about today is you need to be go. You need to work long hours to be successful. So I think it kind of goes into that in that, yeah, you can push yourself, but just make sure that you're also, having that recovery time. If you're working, a week of 12 hours days, maybe take a half day Friday and kind of do something that you love or spend time with your family so you can kind of reset. And that way, when it comes, Monday, you can, go right back to it.
Nice. Now, what was your second point?
So the second point is essentially providing value quickly, constantly, and concisely. So I guess to kind of dive into that, obviously both, your time and your prospect's time is super valuable. So what I try to do on calls is basically provide as much value as soon as possible, but also try to be concise as possible. So I think being like direct and specific about the value that you can bring to that specific person at that specific company in that specific role, and the results they can expect to see will help build immediate trust. And not only that, but it allows you to essentially earn the right for more discovery questions. And then the answer to those discovery questions, you can obviously continue to build value off of. And I think with just being concise, you're essentially respecting their time, and a lot of prospects are very respectful of that. They're like, hey, this guy's not trying to waste my time. He's getting straight to the point. This is how he can help. I'm going to be a little bit more responsive to his discovery questions. Whereas if you're asking 50 discovery questions off the bat, which I see in a lot of calls, I feel like it kind of turns off that prospect. And they're like, hey, you haven't really provided value. Why are you asking me so many questions? You haven't really earned the right to do that yet. And another benefit is, if it's a bad fit, you're going to find out really quickly, and you're going to save both your time from being wasted. So I usually try to, disqualify a prospect within the first, 5 or 10 minutes of a call. And I have no problem, telling them it's a bad fit. So that way I can spend, more time on realistic deals. Another specific tip, I guess, for like specifically emails or demo follow-ups that I found useful in providing like this value immediately is just using like screenshots or GIFs that kind of provide value. So, maybe use Vidyard to kind of create a GIF or video on their actual website showing them, the value you can provide. So I think that's kind of a specific tip on how you can apply that for cold email outreach, for example.
Awesome. And let's talk more, but let's save it for later. I want to talk more about kind of what the value can be specifically, because I think that topic can be really nebulous. So I'd like to dig into that in a little bit more detail. Before we go there, let's talk about your third point.
Yeah, and I think the third point is build consensus. And I know I switched this up on you kind of last second, but as I was thinking more and more about it, I think that's something that really got me to where I was, and that not a ton of sales reps are doing, perfectly today. So I think it's a good area of improvement. But to dive into that, like very rarely do we have a first call where that initial person is ready to pull the trigger, or the initial group of people you're talking to. Whether your prospect admits it or not, there's going to be other stakeholders in most cases, even if it's just for, a budget approval or something like that. So I think just making sure you're building enough of that value and rapport on the initial call will essentially allow you to get that buy-in from the initial stakeholder, which should in turn earn you the right to ask more about who needs to be involved. How are they going to be involved? And talk about, how you can work together to get them on board. So, for example, if 3 other people need to see the demo, you could say, hey, perfect. Do you have access to their calendars? Let's get a time when all 5 of us can hop on a call, walk through this in more detail, talk about the value we can provide, and get consensus on if it makes, sense to move forward or not. And if you did your job well and they see the value, they're going to be happy to loop in their team and kind of share that with them. Hey, I did this work and this is what we can do with this company. The other benefit is you also get the opportunity to set that expectation. Like, hey, we already did all this discovery. Let's get everyone we need on the next call, and then you'll have everything you need to make the decision. So I think that really helps out with like shortening the sales cycle as well as building momentum, which I think is huge in sales. But it also avoids you having to have multiple calls with each new stakeholder, as the deal goes on. And what's cool about that is when you have everyone on the call, I'll often see the initial stakeholder like pitching our solution to their team, which is obviously something that a sales rep loves to hear. Hey, we can use Chili Piper this way to improve this processes and see these results. And you're almost setting up the call as, hey, you're on board. Let's work together to get these other stakeholders on board.
Yeah, great stuff. I think that, really, you're just running a very tight sales process by adopting that, and you're leading what that is, right? You're just asking, hey, who else needs to be involved in this? And your next step is built in. Like, okay, when are we going to do that? Let's keep this moving. So I think you keep a lot of things from being left to chance.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So you sent me another point, and you mentioned you kind of switched things out, and I think it's worthy of talking about. So what was your original point number 3?
Yeah, I was kind of teetering on a few of them, but the original point number 3 was essentially being self-taught. So obviously reps, in most companies are getting feedback from their manager or their peers, which is obviously going to help them get better. But I think it's also really important to, help yourself and take ownership of, teaching yourself. So one example of this, and something I do and that I've improved a lot doing, is just listening to a recorded call, even, maybe once a week. And I'll go through that call and listen through it and maybe just find, 3 things I want to improve within the next week. I'll write them down on a sticky note and I'll put the sticky note on my laptop. So I literally see it on every call. And throughout the calls that week, I'm not going to try to, overhaul 10 or 20 different things that I need to fix. I'm just going to focus on those 3 things. Then the next week comes, listen to the same recorded call, kind of judge yourself. Hey, am I where I want to be for these 3 points? If not, maybe give it another week and keep working on it. If so, swap them out for kind of new things on that call. I mean, that's the way I've really been able to, improve myself, especially being remote. Because I'm not, I'm definitely getting feedback from my team, but I'm not surrounded by a team where I'm hearing, different messaging. And, when I hop off a call, I'm not getting direct feedback from someone that was sitting next to me. So that's a way I can kind of take ownership of, teaching myself and building my sales skills.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, and that is a big part of the reason for this new idea that I had. And those who know me, when I have these ideas, I tend to execute very quickly if I think it's valid, and I validated it with enough kind of friends and fans of the show that I feel like this is legit. So this whole idea of the Daily Sales Tips podcast, this show is so deep dive, right? I mean, I used to say that the average episode was 75 minutes. I've been shooting way past that lately, right? We're trending much closer to 90 minutes. And I feel like it's such a commitment, and that's great. And thank you for listening to this and taking the time. I can't thank you enough for that level of commitment. At the same time, I want to make some of this information more accessible. And initially my thought was, I'd been capturing all of these clips and quotes and putting them on YouTube, and got out of the habit because it was insanely time consuming. But I'm in the process right now of hiring a full-time virtual assistant, and just to put some of those things back in place. And I thought about, what if I did just a short daily podcast where we featured one of those tips and a little bit of commentary, and just made something that was much more snackable and accessible without having to make that 90-minute commitment. And then the vision grew. And then I thought, you know what? This shouldn't only be clips from the Sales Success Podcast. I think this can become a discovery platform to help people develop themselves. And that'll actually be the first tip that I share on that new show, is just this idea of you have to own your own development. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Sales has gotten to a place where, because there's no guarantee on either side of the equation, people aren't going to make a giant investment in your training and really commit to making you better. You have to be the one to own that, and you have to go find the resources and the content and the mentors and all of those things. So hopefully I'm able to deliver that to you in the show and through these conversations. But there's a lot of other really great stuff out there. And I want to expose people to those opportunities, those books, those events, those webinars, all of that different type of stuff. So that's really what the show is going to be. I'm going to set it up so that it is literally 5 to 10 minutes every day, and not more than an hour a week. So if you only check in once a week, you will be able to binge through the whole thing in less than an hour. So like I said at the top, I am putting myself out on a giant limb and committing that this thing will actually exist by the time the show releases on, I believe it's January 22nd. So if you go to dailysales.tips, or hopefully, and sometimes the searchability lags a little bit, but you should be able to go into your podcast player right now, type in Daily Sales Tips, subscribe, and go check that out and share that with your friends. I'm really excited about what that has the possibility to be. All right, that was the longest self-promotional thing I've ever done on this show. So with that, Nate, just give us the context here. Talk about your role, how you got to number one. I know it's been a real short period of time, and also give us the context of Chili Piper.
Sure, yeah. So I'm an account executive at Chili Piper, as mentioned, though we are a pretty early stage startup. So I do wear a lot of hats as well. So I'm not, strictly just doing selling. I help a lot with like the outbound prospecting process and things of that nature. If you're not familiar with Chili Piper, we're essentially a software platform that integrates into your existing web forms to allow qualified leads to either initiate a live call or book a meeting directly from the form with the appropriate rep. So essentially, we're focusing on increasing inbound conversion, meeting completion rates, and essentially just eliminating the manual back and forth of scheduling that, every sales rep that's probably listening to this, hates doing. I'm pretty new there. So I started in July. So I think it's been about 6 to 7 months or so. and actually came on as an SMB rep. And now I do more of the enterprise, and strategic accounts. So kind of moved up the chain there pretty quickly, which, is a great benefit of working for a startup is there's a ton of room to grow. As far as how I actually, got to number one, I mean, the biggest thing, and obviously this is fresh in my mind since I'm pretty new to the role, is just adaptability to change. And with that, just really hitting the ground running. So, I started doing my own calls, running my own calls the second week I started. And the first week I started was July 4th week. So we did have, some holidays there as well. But I just made sure to really study the product and the pitch before I started. I was working nights. Essentially, my goal was just to ramp as quickly as possible because, when you're ramping, you're not making as much money, essentially. So if I can get ramped, as quickly as possible, I'm going to be successful as quickly as possible. So, and, props to Chili Pepper as well, because they really trusted me with, taking calls on the second week. At the time, I was the second AE. So I was essentially the second source of revenue for, new business. So just getting that trust from the team was really, a great first impression for me as well. But I was at a point where I was getting, 6 to 10 calls a day within my first month. So, I kind of got thrown to the wolves, but at the same time, I might be doing 25, 30, 40 calls a day or a week, not a day. And at the end of the week, it's a complete night and day difference. After you do that many calls, you pick it up really quickly. And there's no better way I could have learned it other than to just practice. So, and our enterprise rep actually ended up moving to another position. So, to kind of piggyback off that, our CEO, Nicholas, said, hey, you pick things up like super fast. You're already seeing success within your first couple of months. Let's just move you to enterprise and then we'll backfill your spot instead. So everything worked out, really well. And I think that's, kind of the biggest contributor to where I am today.
Yeah. So we're going to circle back. And as we talk about your results and things like that, I want to talk about, and the reason I thought it would be really interesting to have you on the show is just getting the perspective of somebody that is in a very early stage startup and what that looks like and what that feels like. Before we do that, though, let's talk about sort of your origin story and how you got into sales in the first place and what you've done.
Yeah. So to be honest, it's a pretty long story as it, usually is. What's funny is in middle school, I was actually selling like pixie sticks for nickels and I was, selling burnt CDs for $5 in school. In high school, I used to pre-order the game consoles. So like PS3 would come out, they'd sell out immediately and then you could resell them at a higher price. So I'd buy a bunch of those in mass, invest all my money and then resell them at a higher price. Then I finally got to college. They asked what I wanted to major in, and I couldn't put two and two together. I had no idea. So obviously, it probably should have been something to do with business or sales, but I ended up picking psychology. Got to the end of college, and had no idea what I was going to do with it. Stayed an extra year because I actually decided, hey, I want to pursue, healthcare. So I was an EMT, stayed an extra year in school, ended up getting out of school and worked in the field for about 6 months or so. And I hated it not because of the field, but because I didn't have the grades to get into med school. It would have been a very long road for me to see any type of success. So I kind of stood back and thought, okay, now what? What am I good at? I have to essentially restart. And I thought of business and sales. So I found the first sales job I could and took the offer. My first sales job was a very rough B2B, door-to-door, knocking on businesses. And we were doing outsourced sales for Staples and Verizon. So selling office supplies and, essentially internet and phone contracts. It was 100% commission. So I was making $0 some weeks. Some I would max out maybe $500, $800 the whole 3 months I was there. But it was an awesome experience. I wouldn't want to do it again, but it gave me some tough skin and really kind of learned the initial kind of sales skills you would need. And then I actually went to a government value-added reseller from there that is essentially a middleman for the government to buy software. Didn't see a ton of upward mobility there. And honestly, government sales, wasn't really for me. Ended up taking a full sales cycle account executive role at a company called Shopkeep out of New York. And they actually had set up a pilot office in DC for a product that they recently acquired called Amber, which is a competitor of Toast. So we were just 4 people kind of in this, startup office environment. And we were essentially just testing the product in the market. So we weren't really too affiliated with Shopkeep. We were just kind of testing this new product to see, how it would fare in the market. Ended up moving to Colorado. That was in DC. So I moved to Colorado to where I am today to pursue an MBA at CU Boulder and worked remote for that company. Then eventually went to Exactly, which is an awesome company, great product, good people out of Denver, and had to restart as an SDR because I didn't have the experience, with enterprise software companies because I was selling to restaurants. Picked that up pretty quickly, was promoted to AE within 9 months. and then got the offer from, Chili Piper and made the jump to my role today.
Nice. So a lot of interesting stuff in there. Given that journey, is there anything that you would have done differently knowing what you know now, if you could sort of start that over again?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I, put the two and two together, and the fact that I was selling pixie sticks in middle school, and then, why wouldn't I pursue a career in business? I remember specifically shying away from business or majoring in it, pursuing it, because I always thought of it as kind of like a suit and tie, cubicle, boring job. My dad, who has drilled work ethic into my head since I was a baby, worked for Leidos and SAIC and, essentially the government contractors. It was very corporate. He worked long hours away from home. I mean, he did really well and he was able to support us, which I'm obviously, grateful for. But it wasn't anything I wanted my life to be. And that's kind of what I thought business was. For, I guess, the kids listening, now I work from home or a co-working space or an Airbnb on vacation. And, no one knows if I'm even wearing pants, and I can spend more time with, the people and things I love. So, it was nothing like that. And then also, I just wish I put more effort in. I had fun as a kid in high school and college, but I wasn't doing a lot to kind of set myself up for success, other than the bare minimum and kind of skating by back then. So, I wish I applied myself more back then, but, at the same time, I don't really regret it, because it kind of got me to where I am today. And I think it kind of put me in a place to where I'm a lot more motivated to be successful in this role.
Yeah. So you went from, a well-established mid-sized company at Exactly. And let's talk about kind of your results there, your results at Chili Piper, and then also dig into this idea around just making that choice to go with this early of a stage of startup. Because I know you looked at a number of different opportunities. So talk me through just all of that.
Yeah, so I guess to kind of start with quantification. So when I started Exactly, I was obviously came on as an SDR there. I hit 100% of my ramp quota the first quarter. Second quarter was 121% of quota, and I was the number one SDR there. Third quarter, I was at 190%, and fourth quarter, I was trending at 290% when I was promoted to account executive. I guess I took the role pretty quickly after I got promoted to account executive to Chili Piper. And what's interesting about Chili Piper is we don't actually have specific individual quotas. So I know I probably cheated my way onto the show, because I know you only interview, technically quota carrying reps. But to kind of give you an idea of where I was is in terms of revenue. I mean, my first month I closed 10K. My second month I was at about 50K. And then last month, November, I got right over 80K, which is a month we actually hit a team goal. So to kind of go more into that, obviously we don't have, individual specific quotas, just because how early of a stage company we are. Things are, essentially constantly changing. But what we found is we can do, we'll create these company goals where it's, the benefit is, we have 14 people in the company right now. So kind of creating a quota month by month based on things that are constantly changing doesn't really make sense. But with the team goal, it's really cool because everyone, works together to hit, the specific goal. So you have people that are on more the product side, helping out salespeople, really trying to hit this goal. So this most recent goal in November was basically hitting 200K in new business. So obviously a lot of that's going to rely on the sales team, but the whole company was working together, to hit that goal. And that was my highest month to date. So I was a little over 80K. So we hit that last month. And then the reward was essentially we got to go to Paris. So we literally packed up our bags and went to Paris, 2 weeks later. So I guess the second part of the question where, coming from, Exactly and then going to a super, small startup, I'd always been interested in kind of the startup atmosphere. I think I'm a big risk taker in that, the smaller the company, obviously it's going to be a lot bigger risk. You might be lacking in, certain resources or training time, or, everyone's wearing a ton of hats. So maybe you're not getting the coaching you need. But if it is successful and you have a much bigger impact on making it successful, there's a lot more upside to it. And that's something that, kind of excites me. There's no possible way that you can just get into the groove of your job and just kind of go day by day. I mean, every day you're really pushing and the company's, working together kind of for a greater good. I mean, and that's reflected in our company goal. We're not, with the individual quota, you're focused on your own quota, hitting your own number. But with this kind of startup atmosphere and having these team goals, we're all working together kind of for one common goal, which is to better the company, obviously. And then we all have, skin in the game being such a small company. So we all want to see, the business succeed as opposed to, being tied down, I guess, to an individual number where it's just your own self relying on hitting that number. Whereas, the whole team's relying on, me to contribute so that we can all go to Paris. So I mean, it's definitely a big change, but it's something that keeps a lot of excitement in my job. And I love doing it day to day. And then you grow closer with the company because everyone's kind of working towards, that common goal.
Now, why Chili Piper at the end of the day? I mean, given all the other opportunities that you had as you were interviewing and looking at other roles, why did you choose this and not something else?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple reasons. I mean, the first reason was obvious in that the product is awesome. We have no direct competition right now, which is very lucky being in a sales position. And it's just a concept that, what the product does and helping with the inbound conversion is just not something that a lot of companies are thinking about. So, I directly related to the product. The sales rep is generally the end user. So it's something, I was having challenges with, previously at all my other roles. So finding a tool that can really help out and kind of streamline that inbound process and help with scheduling is something I believed in. And I mean, what rep doesn't hate going back and forth, via email trying to schedule a time? So A, the product. Two, I think the people just in general. So, I was coming on as an SMB, account executive. And my second interview was with the CEO. Actually, my first call was with the CEO. So before I was even like a qualified candidate, I was on a web call, video call, with the CEO for I think like an hour or something like that. So that really attracted me to it in that like, hey, I'm going to be interacting with the C-suite. Whereas maybe at other companies, I've met, the CEO maybe once or twice. So that played a lot into it. And then just during the interview process, I mean, everyone I was meeting was just very intelligent, knew what they're doing, well respected in the space. So I just knew, kind of surrounding myself with that group of people would really help improve my game. And then from a size perspective, I mean, being in a small company, you have a lot bigger, impact on the company. So, if I miss my quota or I miss my number at a large company, that sucks for me, but it's not really a huge deal. Whereas, if I'm missing my number, if I'm not doing well in a small startup where I'm one of three, new business revenue streams, that's a big deal. And then the other side of that, if you are doing really well, you're having a huge impact on the growth of that company. So I think those are kind of the three main things. And then it's just a lot more exciting. I mean, you're not going day by day, just kind of getting by. Every day is different. We're constantly releasing new products. We're constantly changing. We're hiring right now. So there's just a lot of, upside joining a small type of company, but obviously, it comes with the risk as well.
Yeah. Well, and you said you're also remote. Most of the team is remote. Talk about that experience a bit.
Yeah. So it's honestly awesome. It's going to be really hard for me to ever go back to an office if I need to. I think there's a lot of benefits of it. I mean, flexibility. Obviously, it gives you a lot of access to talent because you're not constrained by where the rep is or where the candidate is. So we can also be a lot pickier in that, we don't only have an applicant pool of, Denver or New York or whatever it is. We can hire from anywhere all over the world. We could hire someone in London, California, whatever it is. And it really gives you access to the top talent instead of constraining you to, a specific location. But on top of that, I mean, you just get the flexibility in your schedule. So I can, depending on when my calls are for the day, I cover, the whole world as far as the territory. So I have a lot of early calls. Sometimes I'll have late calls. So I can just be a little bit more flexible with my schedule and when I'm working. And maybe I can knock out an errand during the day and then work, late through the night. And then, I mean, another huge benefit is just you don't have to go into an office. So like a lot of the times I'll go on vacation or something like that and I'll still work, maybe a half day or something like that. And then it allows me to essentially extend my vacation. So like I went to Hawaii in earlier this month for 7 days. And that's not something I could do if I needed to be in the office. So I could, work half days, 3 or 4 of the days. And that way it allows me to kind of extend out that vacation. But I think everyone's just also a lot happier as well. They don't have to deal with the commute. They don't have to waste time, going back and forth. So honestly, it's been awesome. I don't know if I can go back to a strictly office environment just because I kind of got used to this. And honestly, the biggest piece I noticed is just time efficiency. Like I can make the best use of my time. I can work when I'm most ready to go. I mean, if I need a break or need to knock something out during the day, I can do that and then, get right back to work. So I think a lot of huge benefits, and it seems like it's an upcoming trend. I mean, it seems like a lot of companies are starting to hire a lot more remote. So hopefully we'll see, more of that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the highlight reel. Pick the one thing that you're most proud of, and whether it was at Chili Piper or exactly or anywhere before. Like what's been the biggest highlight so far?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on, I guess, two kind of things. So, I mean, the first thing is fresh in my mind because, we just hit it. So this end of month, November team goal that we hit, it was awesome. So we had a monthly team revenue goal that I mentioned where we'd all go to Paris, if we hit it. And we didn't know at the time, but that trip was supposed to be 2 weeks after we hit it. And we weren't 100% confident that we were going to hit it because we had lost the enterprise AE just a month before. We just hired 2 more AEs on, so they're, completely ramping. They were still in training at the time. Obviously, Thanksgiving holidays don't help out, with November revenue. So there's just kind of a lot going on. But within the last week, it was just really cool to see. I've never seen a company work so tight knit, especially from like different departments, to really like accomplish this goal or work towards a team goal. So it was just really cool to see everyone was working, super long hours and weekends to try to get, where we needed to be for this trip. And it was also really cool for us because, again, we work remote. So most of us have never met in person. So this was an opportunity to not only meet in person, but, in a really cool place like Paris. It ended up coming down to the very last day where we beat the goal by like 5,000, I think, in revenue. So it was just kind of a huge team and individual accomplishment. And it was just great to have everyone out at the trip and, meet each other and seeing our success pay off. And I think it really like rallied the company morale because now I think we're a lot closer now that we all have interacted with each other in different departments and really worked together, for that one goal. I would say just another thing is, so obviously I was pursuing an MBA while I was also working at Exactly. So that's kind of a big accomplishment for me, and not necessarily because of like the challenge of the actual course, the course material, but really what I learned was like what's valuable to me, like what are my values and how can I manage my time to, to focus on those values. So going to work with like a quota and, having the school part-time and then balancing, my friends, my girlfriend, my hobbies, my dog, it was just a lot to manage. So I was able to essentially prioritize my time better during the program by focusing on like what's specifically valuable to me. And then now that I'm graduated, I have a lot more time and I can be a lot more efficient with my time. So I think those are the 2 things that stand out as far as biggest accomplishments.
Nice. Now, what about the other end of the scale? What do you find to be the most challenging?
Yeah, so I think as far as like the biggest challenge, I would say it was almost more of an internal challenge. Up until probably my SDR job at Exactly, I was kind of just like going through the motions with these jobs. In my head, I thought I was trying, but it was more, I think subconsciously, I was like, hey, this is a stepping stone of a job to get, where I want to be, which is living comfortably, obviously, probably being a full closing role. And I got a reality check in my first month at Exactly as an SDR because I scheduled 1 meeting and I had a ramp quota. And that was definitely not it. So in order to hit my ramp quota, I had to book 9 meetings the next month. So obviously, I wasn't on pace. I was also, exhausted, not only from, work, but also, doing part-time school, balancing my hobbies and relationships and things of that nature. So one day I just made I was in the car, I think, or something like that. And I just made like a conscious decision that I was going to do my best for myself and my career. So just going through the motions, I was like, if I'm in sales, like I'm going to go all out and see what I can do with this. And that way I'll know, if this is for me or not. And I mapped out basically, all the things that would help me get to where I wanted to be. And that included, mending relationships and having personal time, not just from a work perspective, and committed to it. And on the last day of the month, I got the 9th meeting for 100% quota. And since that day, my numbers have gone up every quarter Exactly. And then they've gone up, monthly as far as revenue at Chili Piper. So it's something I talk about it a lot, just making like that conscious decision because it seems so simple, but I think a lot of people just kind of go through the motions and aren't focused on, doing the best they possibly can. And they might think they are, but like making a conscious decision, like, hey, I'm going to be successful. This is how I'm going to get there. Really kind of changed the way I thought about, I guess, work and sales in general.
Nice. So was that just a one-time, like flip the switch, like, okay, you know what, like I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to give it my best. I'm going to go all in. Or is that sort of do you have to regularly recommit to yourself to stay at that level?
I mean, I think there's a level of recommitment, but for me, it was more of like an on-off switch. I mean, I was kind of balancing like work and school and I'm like, okay, I just want to, keep my head above water. But that's not a reason to be in sales. To be in sales, the benefit of it is you're the only constraint to your success. So I think just making that conscious decision, like, hey, I'm not going to just keep going through the motions. I'm not going to be number 2. I'm going to do what I need to be, to be number 1 and put myself in a place where I want to be. And then I think just backtracking from there, okay, how do I get there? And then sticking to it and actually committing to it. And I was surprised because it worked perfectly. You expect like it's going to be a lot harder than you think. But if you map it out into like digestible steps, it's a lot easier to kind of tackle. And then once you start seeing results, I mean, it gets very addicting. It's similar like if you go to the gym and you start seeing those results, you're going to keep going to the gym. The same thing kind of applied to me in my role, I just kept saying, I hit my ramp quota and I was like, oh, that's awesome. And then I hit, 120% and I'm like, pumped up. Then I hit 190 and it just, kept going and going from there.
Love it. Love it. Love it. So I was going to ask about motivation, but it sounds like a lot of that is just feeding on the results, right? Realizing, hey, when I put in the work, I get these results and it keeps getting better. I'm going to keep going after this.
Yeah, it's just, I love the sense of accomplishment, I guess. So like, setting a goal and then actually accomplishing it, is a great motivational factor for me. Obviously being in sales, money's going to play into it as well. For a long-term goal, I'm essentially just trying to get to where I can to put my, myself and my family in the best position possible. But yeah, I think accomplishing those goals is super, satisfactory. It feels great. And then you can just continue pushing yourself and, getting harder and harder goals. And as you keep hitting them, it definitely continues to motivate you throughout the role.
Yeah. Now let's get super granular. You say that you basically you broke it down, you built this map to success. What were the components? What did that map look like?
Yeah, I think and I do this with a lot of my goals, is obviously if you set a long-term goal, like where do you want to be next year? That's not something you're really attacking day to day. So you're like, hey, I want to be at this role, 1 year from now. I think it's super important to kind of backtrack from there. So, okay, to get to that role, I need to hit quota these 3 quarters. In order to hit quota these 3 quarters, I need to, have this many metrics or get this many meetings, a week or whatever it is. But I think what's important is not to focus on metrics. So, 50 calls is going to get me 2 meetings a week is going to get me, to where I want to be. It's more about getting the actual results. So like you need to focus on the 2 meetings, not the 50 calls, because worst case, if the 50 calls don't get you those 2 meetings, you didn't hit your goal. So I think it's important to just kind of track those metrics. So that way you kind of have a guideline of where you want to be, but it's definitely, not set in stone. But I guess long answer, or, to kind of shorten things up or summarize, I think just creating those long-term goals and making sure you have short-term goals that will get you there is kind of how you, would backtrack that. So like for me, I wanted to be an AE, which I expected to be, at least a year out. So I knew I needed to kind of blow out my quota. In order to do that, I need to work X amount of hours or get X amount of meetings a week, whatever it is for your specific role, and then just stick to it and commit yourself to it. In the worst case, if you miss it, make up for it, another week or another day, whatever that goal is. That it makes it a lot more digestible and attainable when you can focus on, short-term goals that are going to get you where you want to be, long-term.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start to dig into your routines and the way you structure your day. And I'm really interested in kind of the time management piece. It sounds like you really figured that out through the MBA process. So, the way I typically ask this question is just, alarm goes off in the morning. What time did that happen? And just give us the blow by blow from there through the whole day.
Yeah, so I might not have the best answer for you on this question because I honestly don't have a specific morning routine. I think a lot of that plays into my current role today. So like I mentioned, I'm handling pretty much all, time zones. So depending on the day, I might wake up at 5 a.m., grab an espresso, get to the home office and just jump on a call. Whereas, if I'm working more like East Coast hours or something like that, I'll have time in the morning. I can hit the gym beforehand, then kind of get into the calls. And that's honestly, it's something I really love about the job, in that when I get into a routine, I kind of get bored. And again, I've been talking about this a lot, but just kind of go through the motions. So having like my schedule vary a lot kind of, switches things up on me and keeps it a little bit more, exciting, but also gives me, flexibility in my schedule, when I'm actually going to work. So I know it's probably not the most efficient, thing. Obviously, people talk about like if you have a specific routine, it's going to make you a lot more efficient. You're going to see a lot more success. So it might not be, the best answer for you. But yeah, everything kind of changes really day by day. And it's something I actually, enjoy and prefer rather than sticking to, a strict schedule.
So given that model and that structure, how are you deciding really what the priorities are? That's ultimately what a lot of this stuff comes down to.
Yeah. So, and that's probably one of the bigger challenges at the role. And what's specific to our company is our tool actually integrates into our calendar. So that's how we know what our availability is. That's how people book calls in our calendar and things of that nature. So it actually forces me to stay super organized, in that, if I'm going to the gym or if I have a chore or something like that, I need to put it on my calendar. Otherwise, someone's going to book a time or book a call or something like that and have access to that. But as far as how I try to stay organized, I usually leave like 8-ish hours a day open to customer calls, and I'll vary, that slot depending obviously on time zone. So I'll kind of vary that. And I'll usually work longer than that. But worst case, if you're doing 8 hours of back-to-back calls, I'm going to burn out. So I don't want to overdo myself in just calls. But then, obviously, you need to catch up on emails, you need to prospect, you need to create proposals and quotes, etc. So, on those busier days, I might do a little bit less of that. But if it's a bit slower or calls reschedule or move, I have more time to kind of knock things out as far as like an administrative or prospecting perspective. So it does vary a lot. I'll work some days where it's 12-hour days. Other times I'll work kind of shorter days or maybe cut a Friday off to relax or go snowboarding or hang with my family or whatever it is. So it all kind of, evens out there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of tough where we're at, especially in a sales role because, it changes day by day. So I think just making sure you're, keeping consistent, because it's easy if you're busy, you're like, hey, I don't need to do prospecting because I'm busy. I think just making sure like you're still knocking out everything that you need to knock out for a given week or a day or whatever it is, just making sure you're still doing that. But I don't think there's a huge, I don't think there's really a problem with kind of varying how you do that or, which days you do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an important call out, that it's just the environment you're in, right? When you're working with a very small startup and you're wearing a lot of hats and doing a lot of things, like everything's changing all the time. And you just have to figure out how to be flexible, how to adapt, how to figure out what those priorities are and what has to get done and fitting it all in. It sounds like you're leveraging your calendar quite a bit too, just in terms of holding space for some of those core activities and things like that as well.
Yeah. I mean, we have to keep it, you put every chore on there, every block. If you're going to go grab lunch, you need to put a block on the calendar so no one books over it. So it definitely, will keep you honest. And, that's something our customers have to adapt to as well, because they're, they'll implement the solution and they'll get, random demos kind of thrown on their calendar. So I think it's a good thing, though. It keeps you honest and it keeps, your calendar up to date. You know exactly where, what that rep's doing or whatever it is. So I think it's a good, people talk about all the time is you should structure your calendar, I'm going to do prospecting from 9 to 10 or whatever it is. So I think it just kind of helps you, keep honest to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, especially from a team perspective, right? If you're keeping that open and other people are looking at your calendar and looking for time, it saves a whole lot of headache if that's accurate.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, if someone books a call on our calendar, I'm not going to, I don't want to reach out and say, hey, this time didn't work, even though you used our tool to actually book on our calendar. Right. So, I'll pull some strings, make it work.
Not the right impression. Yeah. So we've already talked about your calendar. We've talked about Headspace. What are the other tools and apps that are really core to your day-to-day?
Yeah. So, I mean, we use Salesforce. Sales Loft is a great tool that we use. Sales Navigator. We actually use Lead IQ. I know you had Jeremy on the show pretty recently. So we use Lead IQ, which is a great tool for prospecting. Zoom Video. We use Chili Piper internally to book, all our meetings inbound and outbound. Slack's a big one. Love Slack. You need the Giphy integration if you don't have it, so you can send GIFs all the time. We use PandaDoc, but yeah, and then obviously, Headspace. We use Audible and Stitcher, for audiobooks and podcasts. Love jam into Spotify when I'm not on calls. So those are kind of like my daily go-to apps and software.
Nice. That was a solid rundown. So what about the information diet? What are you reading, listening to, and watching?
So I guess to start off, I mean, I love podcasts. I listen to Audible all the time. Honestly, your podcast is awesome because you're interviewing people that are good at sales. So that sales, they're essentially giving away their secrets and how they got there. So, you can just scroll through your list and say, hey, this company's relevant. I'm going to listen to this podcast, see what this top rep did to get to where he is. So it just seems kind of obvious that, that should be something people are listening to. But yeah, content like that. I love John Barrows. He actually came to Exactly to do a training before I started there, but they were still, talking about the things he mentioned. And one of the big things that stuck out is just kind of the why you, why now with the messaging. So, when you're sending a message to a prospect, why do they care and why do they care now? That's something that's always stuck in my head. And I use that pretty much for any messaging that I do. And all his content's very, like you mentioned with your new podcast, is very digestible and he's very direct and to the point. So I pick up a lot of his stuff. You listen to 10 minutes and you have an actionable item, you can take out of that. Another great podcast, and I would recommend this depending on the industry you're in, is Demand Gen Chat. So it's a podcast our director of marketing, Mamil, actually has. And it's a marketing podcast. But the reason I listen to it is obviously our internal podcast, but also my target customers are, it's talking about things that are relevant to my target customers, which is usually, marketing. So it's really good to learn about what they care about and kind of be in the know of that industry as well. So I'd recommend for like anyone in sales is, listening to podcasts or content that's relevant to the people you're actually selling to. So that way you can be an expert in the space and, be relevant essentially. And then, yeah, I talked about kind of the books we read earlier. But I'm a huge fan of just Audible and podcasts. I think you've talked about this before, but you can listen to it, when you're driving, at the gym, traveling. I'm not a huge reader, to be honest. I have a pretty bad attention span, so I'll read the page, 10 times and forget what I even read. So with Audible, you can easily just scroll back if you stop paying attention, but you can also, speed it up. So I do 1.25, which I know is amateur hour, probably compared to you, but it allows me to consume, 25%, more content than I would if I was, just listening to a standard. So it's a whole lot of everything, but yeah, mostly, podcasts, Audible, LinkedIn content. I try to just stay up to date with the industry.
Yeah, good stuff. So in the last year, what's your favorite thing you've listened to on Audible?
So in the last year, I'd say probably Never Split the Difference. I think that's my favorite sales book. It's just pretty badass because this guy's, talking about hostage negotiations and then relating it to business. So, it's not one of those books where you read it and it's like, you're just kind of like bored, but you're doing it to kind of better yourself. It's a pretty cool book and it's really exciting. He talks about these different negotiations and, how you can use these same tactics, in sales or business. So I would say that's probably my favorite business related book. Actually, right now I'm listening to Sapiens, which is kind of it goes over like the history of humankind. So I do also listen to like some things that aren't strictly business related that I enjoy as well. So that's kind of my top, right now as far as business and more personal, I guess.
Awesome. I got stuck on Sapiens. I don't know why. I never made it past about the halfway point. It couldn't hold my attention. So
yeah, I had a 4-hour drive home from my fiance's family yesterday. So I kind of plugged it in. It can be a little slow, but it's just interesting because it's, it's not stuff they teach you in school or anything like that. And I'm like, I didn't even know this stuff exists or this stuff happened. But yeah, it's definitely a long one. I think it's like 15 hours on Audible. So
I'm probably the wrong guy to be complaining about really long things in audio. So, Nate, do you subscribe to a particular sales philosophy?
Not a particular one. I mean, I think it's really a combination of learnings from them. And I think as time changes, also like how you should sell obviously changes as well. I'd say, I guess the one philosophy that I kind of tailor my sales towards is, customer centric selling. So essentially like acting as a trusted advisor, solving a problem rather than pitching a product. It's worked really well for me because, I'm actually honored to say that, I have CMOs of these big SaaS companies that I'm pitching to on a call or, that we're having that initial call. And within the first few minutes, they're asking me advice on different marketing strategies and things, that, I'm in sales. They know I'm in sales, but I'm having CMOs ask me, what they should do for their marketing strategy this year, something that's unrelated to Chili Piper even. And actually being able to like provide those valuable responses is great. And then, you're instantly building trust and rapport by being, the trusted advisor in the space. So it's great from a job perspective as well, because I feel like I'm helping people and solving challenges as opposed to, pitching a sale or, some of those more aggressive philosophies where you're essentially just pushing someone to take action. So, and I take it, a step further. Once if they purchase or even if they don't purchase, I try to stay in touch with everyone I interact with on LinkedIn, through email, in person, whatever it is, and make sure, if they're a customer, they're having a great experience. If not, just kind of keeping up with them. What's great about sales is you get to build connections and relationships, whether they move forward or not with your software, and maybe it'll help you down the line or you can, leverage them, down the road. So I think just being very customer centric and focusing on their needs is, kind of what got me to where I am today.
Yeah, good stuff. And that brings us back to, in your second point, you talked about providing value. And I said I wanted to circle back on that. I think the challenge with that statement just at face value is it is so open-ended. So for you specifically, what does providing value mean?
So, I mean, like you said, I think it really varies like company by company, but like me, for example, like what I like to do is when I have like some type of messaging is basically think to myself, like how I would react to that messaging. And that's kind of how I like judge if that messaging is value. So, for initial, say you're sending out an initial email to try to gain someone's interest or whatever it is, if there's, 5 bullet points in like 3 percentages of how you can improve and, 3 hyperlinks you can click on to different case studies. And this is someone I never even talked to. I'm going to delete it. So that's, if that's something I write and then I look at it and I'm like, I wouldn't answer this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. So I think like all you have to do is kind of think about, they're a regular person you're reaching out to. So what is something they would find valuable? So for example, instead of doing an email with bullet points and links and percentages and all that, you could say, hey, John, we're working with, these 3 direct competitors to help this process. And this is how we're doing it. they've seen these business results, and then essentially just asking like, hey, would it make sense to talk? And if you provided enough value up front initially, then does this make sense to talk should be rhetorical, because, what leader doesn't want to know what their competitors are doing to better their business if it's actually working too? So I think like you mentioned, I think it really varies company by company, but just you kind of have to earn that right to even get a response, or earn the right to even do discovery by doing your own research and, knowing how you can help that company.
Yeah, good example. Nate, is there something you believe that the average sales rep would think is crazy?
I mean, honestly, I feel like people think I'm crazy all the time because of just how my schedule's arranged, which I know I've talked about, already. But like one of my hobbies and something I love to do, in my spare time and my personal time is to snowboard. So, for example, like if I know there's going to be a big snowstorm coming on Friday, I might work harder and work nights for that full week. So that way I can kind of use that as a reward for, working my ass off throughout the whole week. So maybe I'll take a half day Friday and go snowboarding. So, I mean, I get asked all the time, I'm like, how do you have this type of schedule? How are you snowboarding on a Friday? You're in sales. You need to work 24/7. But I think you can always make up, that time by just being more efficient when you're actually working, but also, maybe working nights or weekends so that you can allow that time to be off, or allow that time to kind of do what you like to do. So, I mean, I guess I like to use it almost as a reward or a motivation to kind of grind to that point. And a lot of people kind of think I'm crazy or think I kind of slack off because, I'm doing things I love in the middle of the day on a Friday or something like that. So that's something I get, people think I'm crazy, I guess, for.
Yeah, I suppose I get a lot of the same reaction. In fact, I'm thinking about focusing my presentation this year at the Sales Success Summit on just time management and the way that I'm able, because the biggest question I always get from folks is like, how the heck are you doing all of this? How are you managing a $3+ million quota and hosting this podcast and hosting this event and publishing these books? Like, how on earth is that happening? And at the end of the day, it just comes down to priorities and focus. And when you're working, you're working. I think the biggest challenge in general right now is there's just so many distractions. I disabled my Facebook account years ago because I just found it to be a bottomless pit of distraction. Like I can't do that a little bit. So it's gone. It's gone. So anyway, what about the other side of that? Is there something that the average sales professional believes that you think is crazy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other side of that is, I'd say most sales professionals, I don't want to, group everyone together, but there's a belief or culture that, you have to go nonstop, or you have to work 24/7, you have to keep grinding, that type of attitude. I mean, obviously this has kind of been, I guess, a common theme of our conversation, but I think you really need to like relax and enjoy time off and, reset. And I'm obviously a huge advocate of that, but I think in the end, it makes you honestly more efficient long-term in the long haul. So like if you're working 24/7, 5 days a week, you're probably not, being super efficient with your time. Like you're probably a little burnt out, or, one benefit about working remote is you don't have to be in the office, just wasting time. So if you're working an 8-hour day job in the office and you're burnt out hour 7, maybe you're just kind of chilling, or someone's walking by your desk and distracts you for an hour or something like that. So I think a benefit of, working remote is you can really remain efficient when you're actually working, but at the same time, be go when you're working, but at the same time, make sure you're taking your time off and, relaxing and resetting and, taking a breather, even if it's, 5-10 minutes during the day.
Yeah. Awesome. What have been the most important decisions you've made or lessons you've had to learn to get where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think the biggest decision, or I guess the biggest challenge I was facing that led to that decision, is I was really trying to balance out too many things at once. And it was having a negative effect on my personal and my professional life. So like back when I was at Exactly, I had a girlfriend, I had a dog to take care of. I was trying to hang out with my friends. I had my MBA classes. I had a quota at work. I'm trying to go to the gym and, eat healthy and cook and all that. And I like watching football, and I like going to happy hour and snowboarding. And, the list was endless. And I ended up on the go, 24/7. And, I was always stressed out and always had anxiety. And it just got to the point where I was like, there has to be like some way around this. Like, this is not sustainable. And I talked about this earlier, and it's probably I think it's one of the biggest contributors to my success is just being able to prioritize your values. And that's something, you just mentioned as well by, deactivating Facebook, for example, but it just really allows you to focus on what's important in your life. So, now I'm done with my MBA program, obviously, that's off my plate. But now I can focus, my number one priority is my fiance, my family, my friends, and my dogs. Number two is my health. So obviously, staying healthy is important to your career as well. Snowboarding, which is my escape, my hobby, thing I like to do on my free time. And then, work, which essentially allows me to take care of all the previous things and make sure, I'm in a good position. So just kind of prioritizing your values really allowed me to focus on those specific areas of my life. And I mean, I'll still go grab beers and watch football. I'm a Redskins fan though. So it's a rough season. It's a rough life actually, but by lowering the priority of, watching football and drinking beer compared to, hanging with my fiance, it's allowed me to really better those areas of my life. And at the end of the day, there's not enough time for everything. So like you mentioned, you deleted Facebook because you find yourself scrolling. If you're using that if you're using that time on things in your life that, you value and want to improve on, I think that's, kind of the biggest decision I made in regards to just, creating values and focusing on your time in life.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip, especially this time of year, right? I think we're always thinking about, it's January, we're working on the goals, we're working on those priorities, we're thinking about all the things we want to do. I think it's equally important to really look at what are the things we can stop doing? What do we need to deprioritize to free up time on the more important things? And I have a debate with myself every fall. I've not fully ever committed to this because I keep thinking I'm just going to stop watching football because that would free up a lot of time.
Yeah, fantasy football kills me.
But here's the hack, though. It's hard because I like local teams, right? I like the Longhorns and I like the Cowboys. So I have to try and put myself in a bubble and make sure that I'm not getting notifications and updates. But I record them, and you can watch a 3.5-hour football game in an hour and a half if you're skipping commercials and the BS between plays and everything else. And in fact, I heard a stat on, where was this? Maybe it might have been like an NPR quiz question or something like that. And they asked how much time in an NFL game is the ball actually in play? And we know, I'm pretty sure the average time to play a game end to end is 3.5 hours. I don't know the exact right answer. Maybe I'll have to put it into the show notes. So I'm gonna fact check myself. And if you go to top1.fm, it'll be there. I think it's 13 minutes that the ball is actually in play, that the clock is running. I mean, it was an extraordinary stat. So I've halfway hacked my way to making football a tolerable distraction, especially since the rest of my family isn't into it. So it becomes sort of a very selfish thing every Saturday, every Sunday.
Yeah, well, don't tell the broadcasting companies because then the ads get cut and then they're out of business. So
yeah, they'll deal.
But yeah, no, I agree. And with, fantasy football, the day after, that's the first thing you check even before work sometimes. So it's I've debated quitting these fantasy football leagues every year, but at the same time, you don't want to be the one guy that drops from the league. So yeah, it's definitely something I'm still working on. But yeah, if you come up with that solution and I could watch a game in 15 minutes, just let me know and maybe that'll help things out a bit.
Yeah, I don't have it all the way down to 15 minutes, but an hour and a half is, you still get to enjoy it a little bit. And fantasy football that is a can that I will never open and never have. And it's the same thing for me with gaming. I am so competitive. I cannot start any kind of video game on my phone. We will not buy a console in my house. I mean, we bought a Wii at one point, but that's as close as it's going to get because it's game over. I have to win stuff. And so, I can't even start. It's like that first hit of crack. It's a bad idea.
Yeah, it's we have one. I'll play it occasionally, just kind of unwind at night sometimes. But yeah, I love playing 2K, which is like a basketball game. But yeah, if I lose, I'm pissed. I'm going to bed angry. It's too competitive for that, I think.
Nate, I'm really interested in the advice that you would have for somebody that's just getting started out in their sales career today, especially looking at the last two roles that you've held, right? You advanced really quickly through the SDR ranks at Exactly, and you're doing really well in this new AE role at Chili Piper. What advice do you have to somebody else that's just getting started in that type of an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I think this applies obviously to people that are new in the opportunity, but this still something I push for every day is just increase your overall at bats. So, a lot of people start in sales and, especially when I started as SDR, I'm like, all right, well, they need, to be an AE, I need 1 to 2 years of experience. And you kind of have that type of time constrained BS, which is not really true. I mean, if you work your ass off and you're hitting, 200% to quota by getting as many at bats as possible, you're obviously going to fail at a ton of those, but you're also going to learn from those at bats. Eventually, you're going to get to where you need to be. You're going to hit your high numbers, and then you can use that. Those numbers is concrete evidence of your performance. So you can use those numbers to leverage growth within your company. If it's not something your company wants to do, I mean, you can take it elsewhere. People that hear about SDRs that are hitting 2 and 3 times their number are not going to be hesitant about hiring you onto their company or giving you an opportunity there. I think just, increasing those at bats. And that's something like I did at Chili Piper as well. I mean, I was taking as many calls as possible. They might not even be the most qualified leads, but I wanted to hop on and learn why they weren't qualified and ask questions and, essentially force myself to fail. So that way I know, learn from that. And then, I could use the learnings from those failures and continue to improve as fast as possible. So I think the only way to really improve is obviously just getting as many at-bats as possible, doing as many calls, emails, reaching out to as many people as possible. And that'll make you learn as quickly as possible, obviously ramp, and then hit the numbers you need quickly as well.
Good stuff. And Nate, I know that you are a fan of the show. You've listened to a lot of these episodes. So what do you want to know? And maybe something that I'm not already asking, what do you want to hear from the top sellers in other organizations?
Yeah, huge fan of the show. Obviously, it's awesome hearing everyone's kind of tips and tricks that, the other top performers are doing, so I can incorporate them into my own process or kind of, take my own twist on them. And something I'll do is that, when I first started listening to the podcast, I would just scroll through and be like, hey, this company's kind of like us. And I would listen to that and kind of steal those secrets. But I guess something specific that, isn't touched on very often that I'd be interested in kind of learning more about is essentially like side hustles or maybe investments that, the reps are doing aside from their primary job. I know a ton of reps that are top reps are, they're probably getting decent commission and kind of have some money that they can either play around with or invest or, start something on the side. So I think it's really interesting to kind of hear about that, whether it's, maybe they're investing in real estate or stocks or they have a side company or, like you're doing a podcast as well. Or, obviously there's tons of different sales reps that are doing podcasts on their own. So it's just kind of cool to hear about things aside from, their general role that they're using to, make money or maybe get their name out there.
That's a great question. And one of the things that I'm working on, welcome to 2019, is really driving more engagement and more conversation around the show. So I actually upgraded our comment software on the site on top1.fm. So let's address that question in the comments related to this episode, which I've lost track. I can't count. So if you go to top1.fm/Nate, that'll take you there. And, share if you're working on a particular side hustle, if you've got an investment strategy or things that you invest in that are of interest for you, share those things. Let's get a conversation going. I think that'll be a really fun way to address that question. I appreciate you asking it because it does come up, not directly on the show, but as just a sideline. I get asked about that a lot too. So great, interesting question. I don't need to ask more questions on the show and make it longer. So let's take that one offline to the online, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, for me personally, it's not something I'm huge, like I don't have a ton going on the side. So that's actually why it interests me. Because I'm like, how are they balancing their job and doing all these side hustles and blah, blah, blah. But I know I do. I mean, I invest in stocks. It's really interesting to me. I don't do anything too crazy just because I'm really focused on my role today, that where I don't have a ton of time to just research stocks all day. But I did just, recently buy a house and, real estate investing is something, I'm interested in. But to be honest, I'm not doing a ton of side hustles or anything like that right now. So definitely be interested to kind of hear what other top performers or any performers are doing to kind of balance, that work, but also, the side hustle as well.
Yeah, awesome. Good stuff. So top1.fm/Nate, join the conversation. Would love to hear what you guys have to say about that. Well, Nate, I think we made it to the end. So before we provide our actionable challenge, was there anything that I didn't get to or points that you were hoping that you'd get to make that somehow I didn't ask the right question?
Not necessarily. I mean, I had the top 3 things kind of I learned being at Chili Piper. So I don't know if it would help to kind of run through that, but they're pretty, actionable as well. Or if you prefer, we kind of jump, straight to that last question if we're up on time.
You can't tease me with good content and just say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to skip over it. Hit me. What do you got?
Yeah. So the top 3 things that kind of stood out to me, and I owe a lot of this to our CEO, Nicholas Vandenberg, who kind of we do a lot of like one-on-one coaching. That's who I report to directly. But the top 3 things I kind of took out of, working with him over the past 6 months. The first thing was have the prospect actually experience their pain in their process. So something that I really changed since starting at Chili Piper was instead of just having like the lead talk about their challenges or you asking them about their process, I mean, you're on a web call, you're probably on a Zoom or something similar. Have them actually like share their screen and show you the process. And what I found from that is not only is obviously experience is going to make them kind of delve in the process and how it can improve, but you can also find a way to have them experience your solution as well. So for example, at Chili Piper, we'll often ask them to, share their screen on Zoom. We use video for all our calls, which is awesome, really increases engagement and rapport. But this kind of takes it a step further, like, hey, walk through your process on your screen. Like, let me see what you guys are doing. And then once we see their process, we actually uncover that, there's a lot more pain than they might not have even brought up, or you might see something that, they didn't think was a big deal that you can help out on. Or, worst case, maybe their process is awesome and it's not going to be a good fit and you can kind of figure that out. And then from there, we'll actually send a link. We have a demo environment that they can actually experience on their own. So while the screen is shared, they can walk through it, see how their process would change. When they kind of get that night and day difference, as opposed to me telling you how it's going to work, they can actually experience it. So I think that's kind of, the first point I took out. Second one is a tone that he calls, I don't know if this is a well-known thing, but essentially friendly curiosity. So it's kind of like a toter style you can use at the end of the call. Obviously, if there's value and rapport is built, correctly, but just having like a friendly curiosity in asking like the decision-making process. So, if you build rapport and show value and you've got that, that stakeholder on board, you can just, very nice to say like, oh, well, who needs to be involved in this? And like, even asking what do we need to do to make it happen? You're kind of including you in the prospect. You can kind of get a lot of like questions that you wouldn't think that you could get out just because you already have that rapport and you're, how can we do this? Or how can we make this happen? Or, what people are going to be blockers or, how do they receive, when you usually bring them software tools that can help out, like, is this person like usually open to it? And you kind of get a lot more information on, stakeholder management essentially. And then the last thing I think is just how to say no. So we have very transparent pricing and contract terms. So we actually don't do any discounting or any monthly payments. Everything's annual up front. And I think way too many reps and managers are just automatically saying yes. And we need a discount if we can get this in, December, can we get 20% off, and just saying yes without really pushing back. So, I've kind of learned to really stand my ground, obviously, because I have to, because we don't discount, but it's something I can take with me, throughout my career, and basically being forced to kind of say no and say no in certain ways where you can provide value elsewhere is something I'll definitely, take throughout my career.
So I especially love that last point. And a lot of times, we don't necessarily have control over it as an individual contributor, but I love this idea of just the price is the price. I think that there is so much trouble that we have gotten into with the discounting that we do. And frankly, we've trained our customers to just wait until the end of the month or the end of the quarter or the end of the year. Cause I know like, oh, you're going to drop your pants and you'll do whatever I need to do that. If you're just consistent, and frankly, it's one of the things that I'm doing with the Sales Success Summit. Like the price is the price. The earlier you join us, the better your price is. There's no discounts. There's no games. Like it has a ton of value, and that's how much it costs, right? And you don't go into an iPhone store and ask to get an iPhone for $700. It's just not the way it works. And I think when you're able to be consistent about that and hold firm to your value, everybody wins. Right? I mean, your margins are good. The sales rep is going to earn a full commission. I just think way, way, way too often are we defaulting to price and discount when oftentimes that's like the third, fourth, fifth, eighth most important thing when it comes to whatever your client is trying to solve for.
Yeah, definitely. It's crazy because I'll actually evaluate tools for our sales team. Obviously, we wear a lot of hats, but, before, I'll be going through a piece of software, whatever it is, their solution. And before we even get to the end, like, they haven't even got bought in from me. And they're like, hey, we're also running a special where we can discount. And like, I haven't even shown interest yet. And they're already kind of, providing that discount. So yeah, I think it's very overused. And I think if you provide the value and they see it and they understand, pricing shouldn't really be an issue. But what I found with the no discount policies, we actually have more people that are upset that they can't get a discount than the actual price. So like, yeah, the price is fine. We can get budget approved, but we always get a discount. So like, there's kind of like that, it's almost their ego. Like, we don't want to go with you. You won't even give us a discount when all your competitors will. So it's it's something I kind of had to get used to, but I think it's a skill that you can kind of pick up and take with you. So I definitely encourage people to kind of stay on their ground a little bit more. And at least, if you're going to use it, at least make sure you have buy-in and, that it's actually going to get you the action you want. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap it up with your actionable challenge like we do at the end of every episode. The interviews are always 2 weeks apart. So I ask for something that the listener can do over the course of the next 1 to 2 weeks to improve themselves and improve their results. What is that challenge?
Yeah, I think something that's super easy to do is essentially just be concise. So whether you're sending emails or pitching your product or creating messaging, for a call or whatever it is, maybe write out the script or write out the email as you would, but then go through it and try to use literally as little words as possible. If you can get rid of a the or an a or a very or anything like that, just try to take it out and see how short you can actually make that message with the same value and the same messaging. So, and that's something I do consistently. So I'll write an email out, that's not a challenge for me for 2 weeks. That's something I do all the time. But if I write an email out, why waste words on, you'll see very huge, improvement. Like just make it super short so they can read it easily, get the value, and then they're good to go. Bonus challenge, I would say, if you work through the holidays, make sure you take some time off, relax, see your family. If you're anything like me, you'll come back fully ready to go and more efficient than, if you just truck through it. So I threw a bonus challenge on you, but those are my two.
So Nate, I'm going to take your challenge right now. Here goes. Do me a favor. Go subscribe to the new Daily Sales Tips podcast right now. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Sales Success Stories podcast. To be sure you never miss an episode, and for an invitation to our sales success community powered by Influitive, subscribe to our newsletter at top1.fm.